Hi, all dear listeners. Welcome to this new episode of my podcast, A Digital Tomorrow. Today, I have the huge pleasure of being joined by Jochen Biedermann, who's been doing a lot of work on the area of fintech and finance in general, and we're going to talk about international financial centers. Welcome, Jochen, to my podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to talk to you today.
Well, the pleasure is absolutely mine, and I think it would be interesting for my listeners if we, in case they don't know you, if we start talking a bit about your background. How did you end up becoming such an important voice when it comes to fintech, finance in general, financial centers? What brought you where you are?
Oh, this is a long story, and I'm not sure whether half an hour will be enough, and on the other hand, will be also very boring for your listeners. But maybe let me start looking at the most recent 6.5 years, almost 7 years. Um, we founded the Vertilines of International Financial Centers, which I represent as a managing director, in 2018 with 11 financial centers, with the idea of institutionalized collaboration among leading financial centers globally. It goes back to EU Roundtable of Financial Centers, which was founded around 2006-ish. So exists for quite a while to exchange thoughts about EU financial market policy and financial center issues. There have been always so much to discuss on the EU level. And in 2018, we extended it to a global level. We now represent 29 financial centers. The most largest one, the brand names you normally think about, but also emerging financial centers in Asia, in Africa, and in other parts of the world, which definitely will. These are places where we see a lot of growth in the coming decade, maybe for the rest of this decade and in the next decade, and also places where they usually leapfrog financial services, right? So and most modern ways of providing financial services, digital, customer-centric, but also, of course, green and sustainable and inclusive, right? So we have seen this in China, we have seen this in India, we have seen this in African countries. So this is our work, organize this kind of collaboration between the financial centers.
Mhm. Actually, my next question was going to be about this. I wanted to ask you about the World Alliance of International Financial Centers, like what is organization, and then more specifically, what are these things you do important? I mean, if you could please let my listeners know a bit about this.
Yeah. For your listeners, maybe it's important to understand, and this is a question I face regularly talking to people about our work. Their initial reaction is, our financial centers, I thought they compete with each other, right? So this is something I hear very often. And my answer is yes. But this kind of competition is overrated in a way. There's serious competition between maybe the top 4 or 5 financial centers on a number of issues, whether it's foreign exchange, whether it's investment banking, IPOs, and so on. And then secondly, there's an element of regional competition. Look at the Middle East, at the GCC countries. Of course, there's a competition. Look in Europe among the EU financial centers. There has been a lot of competition after Brexit, and so on and so forth. So this kind of regional competition exists, and the global competition. But let's face it, a financial center in Africa is not competing with London or Hong Kong or Tokyo or New York, right? With one notable exception, and maybe we can discuss this later, which is talent. I hear many complaints of emerging financial centers in Africa and Asia saying, the brightest young talent we educate at our universities, they used to go to London or to New York or to Hong Kong or to Tokyo, right? So, and then, we have spent efforts and money to teach them, and then they are lost. And it's very difficult for us to get them back to our country where we desperately need them, right? And their expertise. So this is maybe the only element of competition. Collaboration, on the other hand, is much more needed. We have so many topics which needs alignment. Maybe, financial centers cannot set standards themselves, but maybe discuss standards which are ultimately set by governments and regulators. Look at sustainable finance in various ways: climate finance, circular economy, blue economy, ESG reporting, and how we can make it more readable for investors and more useful for investors. Then the whole topic of digital transformation, right? So there's so much to learn, and we also look at standards, right? Let me mention the topic of AI in finance, where we desperately need to exchange data across borders, right? So we need data to train our algorithm, the AI, and it's very difficult to use them across borders for data privacy and compliance reasons. So this also requires coordination between financial centers, that the data can be exchanged in a compliant way. And then we have a lot of further topics. Women in finance is something we look at. We want to see more female leadership in the financial industry. Talent, I've mentioned already, this is relevant for everyone in the financial industry. How we can educate talent, how we can reskill the current employees in the financial industry, how we can retain talent, or as I mentioned before, for emerging financial centers, how we can get back talent from the diaspora, right? So which we need at home. We have more topics also in the regulatory space, but yeah, just to give a little bit of an overview of what we discuss regularly.
No, thank you for sharing. I think that's actually very interesting, this idea of trying to emphasize the areas in which financial centers need to and should collaborate rather than those in which they compete, because as you said before, and that's true, especially when you check the media, they usually tend to focus on the areas where they compete. I mean, that's common. I mean, it's easy to see all the time the media talking about whether Hong Kong or Singapore, for example, are attracting more family offices or this and that. But it's interesting as well to see that financial centers can and need to cooperate much more closely. And I also wanted to ask.
And then you look at these rankings, right? So which are very popular.
Yes.
There are several ones, but the most prominent ones is published biannually by Yen Group. They're doing it for a very long time. And I used to say, on one hand, our members, they don't like these rankings too much. But on the other hand, it's also good marketing for financial centers, right? So we are in the news, and then there's a discussion whether Hong Kong or Singapore is number 3 and so on and so forth, right? Or whether London versus New York, currently New York has a lead. So of course you can argue a lot, right? So, and there's there are no measures, everyone can agree on. Depends on which KPI, which performance indicators you look at. It depends on the weighting you use and so on and so forth. Of course, financial centers, and we haven't discussed this yet. First and foremost, they are physical industry clusters. So they're clusters of the financial industry. Easy to spot. This is usually where the high rises are in the city centers. So because the financial industry can afford very expensive, costly office space. They go to cities where there's not much space. Whether you look at Tokyo or Hong Kong or New York, it's everywhere the same. So they have the money, to build themselves or move into high rises. So this is where you see that physical clusters. But it's not only about banking or insurance companies. It's so much more. The whole financial centers, as we understand them, they cover the whole ecosystem, including universities, central banks, regulatory authorities, fintechs, so startups in the financial industry, of course, and many more, asset management, wealth management. So they tend to go to one place, form a cluster like other industries. And now it's a question how you can measure this, right? So because a lot of different things going on. Is it the height of the high rises and who has the highest one, or is it the employment in the financial industry? Is it the stock market turnover? Whatever, right? So there are a lot of different measures, and then you do these rankings. Yeah, you can always question them, but as I said, on the other hand, it's also good. But it's not like a football league, right? So we should understand this, right? Where it's very clear who is number one, who number two, right? So number one is the team who has scored the most or won the most games, right? So this is well defined. But financial centers, you can look at hundreds of different indicators, and depends on the weighting and which indicators you use, you will get a totally different picture, right?
That's true. No, that's actually very common, because depending on which area you put your focus on, or which ranking you check, you may have, as you said, New York as number one, or London, or Hong Kong, or Singapore, depending on which area you're actually checking. It's not, as you said, like checking who's like first in a football league, which is something much easier to check. That's more difficult when it comes to financial centers, I guess. And I mean, you already told me a bit of that before when you talked about universities, etc. But why are financial centers key to supporting economic growth? Why is their role so important?
First and foremost, this is why the financial industry exists, right? So this is often forgotten, and we were reminded in 2008 during the financial crisis, that it's the role of the financial industry is not to guarantee high salaries of its employees. This is maybe a side effect, but the role of the financial industry in a country is finance the economy and finance the people, right? So this is the very basic, right? This is how the financial industry started, has developed over time, right? This financing functions, and then of course further services, added value services, right? So it's not about saving and lending money out. Of course, it's much more, but this is the basic service, right? So, and if you want to measure the financial industry, you need to measure, how well, this financing function is achieved, right? And not, as I said, not the salaries of the employees or who has the highest high rises.
Mm-hmm. And I know it's a broad question, but you mentioned before this case of nationals of countries with financial centers who travel to study to abroad, let's say to an Ivy League university, for example, but then in the end they do not return to their home country, to their respective financial center, but they decide to stay instead in the country where they studied. So I know this is a very broad question, and it requires public approach, a multi-points approach, but what do you think financial centers from these countries can do in order to try to make sure that those who go abroad to study return to their countries and stay there, thus enhancing that financial center instead of remaining in the other country?
Yeah. Um, First, please allow me to mention we have a publication in preparation, which will go out soon, maybe even before end of this year, on talent, also discussing this aspect and also providing best practices for financial centers in that. But also, as I said, looking at reskilling, education, and so on and so forth. Getting First, of course, the first question is, can you retain that talent you educate? I've seen some clever ways where maybe the university study is sponsored in a way by a government or subsidized under the condition that that person stays for several years in the country and cannot go abroad immediately. Of course, it's not a prison. If that person goes abroad, then has to repay the fee for the study, right? So this is usually a deal which might work. Getting talent back. First and foremost, we need to look at why financial centers are attractive, right, for people to return, and of course. It should be a nice place to live, right? So this is number one, right? So financial centers need to work on the environment, on their standard living costs, but also what they offer and so on and so forth, right? So. And if you have a quite attractive place to live, also maybe to return with your family, let's maybe return with children and so on, from kindergarten schools and so on, universities. This is a very good start because those people, are in places like New York or London or so, and have maybe quite attractive conditions. So they're used to that environment, maybe working there for 5, 10, 20 years, right? So they have their friends there, so they have their communities there. So yeah, offering an attractive place. Salaries maybe also matter. Of course, maybe the cost of living will be lower if you return. So maybe you don't need to match exactly salaries, but also should be attractive. But most of the time, it's about the feeling of those people want to give something back, and this is something you can address. Give them the feeling they can give something back to their country, right? So, and maybe then they will return, right? So. But it's not easy. Let's face it, right? So if you are living for 20 years in a place and you have a good salary, your family, everything is working well, and then you think of returning to your home country, might be a challenge, right? So
yes,
yeah.
you're right indeed. And based on your work with financial centers, do you think there is like any area, any part of the world that tends to be overlooked, but you think has huge potential? Because we all know which the strongest financial centers are. We talk about them all the time, but
Yeah.
do you think there is
Yeah.
any area
Yeah.
that is kind of forgotten by the media, but you think has like huge growth, interest?
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, if you look at the financial center development, there's always a time lag. At the end, the financial industry follows the growth opportunities, the growth potential, provided that there's a stable environment for the financial industry to operate, and also sound legal and regulatory environment. So if your country which is stable and has a sound legal and regulatory framework and will offer huge growth opportunities in the next 10 to 20 years, then still might take some time for the financial industry to come, find it out because they maybe want to observe how stable it is, right? So will take some time. So the high rises will not move immediately to that place, right? In a way, right? So it takes some time. So means the places where we now see the high rises, this were the growth opportunities of the recent decades, right? So some opportunities will stay, maybe some opportunities might not be so attractive anymore in the next 10 to 20 years. If we look at countries, at regions, I mentioned before, I'm very bullish on Africa. Not everywhere, of course. Africa is huge, but some countries, including some countries where we have members, I'm very positive about. We also have a roundtable, a regional chapter for Africa, currently with financial centers of Casablanca in Morocco, Lagos in Nigeria, Kigali in Rwanda, then Mauritius and then Nairobi, Kenya, they're members. And I'm positive for all, not because they're members, but before they become members in our association, we had a due diligence. We looked at all the prospects and whether they are stable and have a sound legal and regulatory environment. So this is how they joined our association. I'm very positive on all of them. And some are smaller countries, some are larger countries like Nigeria. Some already have a decent GDP per capita, like Mauritius. Some still need to grow. But there will be, without doubt, there will be huge opportunities. And if there's, let me put it that way, money to be made, then the financial industry will go there, and they have started already. Same applies for Southeast Asia. The ASEAN countries, I'm also very positive. Again, not all of them, but some of them will develop very nice, and they also have a strong support by financial centers like Singapore and Hong Kong, which are in the region and which want to work with them. Not to mention the mainland Chinese financial centers, Shanghai and Beijing. Central Asia, we also have Astana in Kazakhstan as a member, but also we work with Tashkent in Uzbekistan. I'm also quite positive. Maybe they're a little bit smaller than the other financial centers I've mentioned. So, and also South America, right? So I see a lot of growth potential there. Maybe a little bit less in Europe. Let's face it, we both are currently in Europe, but unfortunately, maybe the growth potential is limited. Europe, from my point of view, will still be a cozy place with high standards and so on, but we will not see, this double-digit growth anymore, right? So this is rather unlikely. The financial industry will stay, but maybe we will see more developments on other continents.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think that's very interesting what you said, and I agree with you as well. I mean, not to mention the Draghi report, but I think in some areas when it comes to innovation, we are lagging a bit behind in Europe, even though, of course, as you said, the standard of living is still very high. But some of these countries you mentioned are actually doing very interesting things when it comes to fintech and tech in general. Brazil, for example, is home to lots of fintechs. Kazakhstan, for example, is doing a lot of work on central bank digital currencies. I know their central bank is very active, and the same applies to Morocco, right? Casablanca, and all the other financial centers that you mentioned before. And you mentioned before as well the idea of ESG, sustainability, which are, to put it some way, trending topics these days. But I wanted to ask you, how important are ESG, sustainability becoming for financial centers and the finance industry in general? I mean, is it as important as it seems in the media, or how do you see it?
It has become a very, very important, crucial topic for financial centers. Maybe with a little bit of notable exception in the United States, but maybe we can talk about this a little bit later. In particular, when we talk about ESG, climate finance in general, this is something all our members, have a strong focus. Whether it's about issuing green bonds, whether it's about the reporting towards investors, like for instance, using ESG, or other ways of sustainable finance, or even broader corporate social responsibility reporting. We published a paper 2 months ago with a call for making this more machine readable, easier to digest for investors, instead of having this long textual stuff, because investors want to see numbers, right? So they want to see your scope 1, 2, 3 carbon emissions, right, in tons of CO2, and not that long text where you hide some sort of what's really going on, right? So on the other hand, we also need to be reasonable, right? So if the measurement of all these numbers costs more than the production itself, right? So, and a sizable part of your workforce is on a daily basis has to deal with this kind of reporting, it also doesn't make sense, right? So we need to focus on the large companies, on the highest polluter, right, in terms of CO2 emissions, and have a very, very sound and reasonable approach. This is my personal opinion, right? So, but yeah, I think we have to focus on it. We have to try our best to prevent the worst in terms of climate change. I think we definitely will see really, really significant, let me put it that way, damages due to events caused by climate change in the next decades until the end of this century and beyond. We also, of course, will probably have to mitigate those damages, but still we can prevent the worst, right? So, and then need to put all efforts into doing so. But of course, it requires coordination, and in a way, it requires that everyone is working on it, right? If only half of the planet, or even only 25% of the planet is working on this, then it's a little bit difficult, right? So, yeah, it's a challenge. But on a financial center level, the products are there, the liquidity is coming. So, just ultimately, of course, depends on the investors, right? So what the investors are willing to buy, right? Whether they're willing to buy those products, whether they're willing to follow ESG as part of their investment decision, right? So this is something financial centers can only nudge, but and governments can also only nudge, but investors decide, right? And if they cannot invest in the way they want to invest in one country, they move their money elsewhere, right? So let's keep this in mind.
And given that you mentioned before those reports that you make, I wanted to ask you, how difficult is it for you to gather data from or regarding financial centers? I mean, I know that they must have their own data, etc. But do you think it's a challenge, or it's something that actually comes easy? What do you think about that?
It's a big challenge, and we had our own approach on collecting that data. We still do internally. Originally, when we started, we had a project from 2018 to 2020 on setting up a database, not rankings, but setting up a database with a key performance indicator for financial center. We want to make it public, but it's difficult to agree on a good set of data points for financial centers. Let me briefly explain you why. First, it's difficult, to how to say, capture financial centers geographically. You can neither look at the city limits, nor you can look at the country limits, right? So I give you a few examples. If you look at the city limit, then or even at the country limit, then a financial center like Luxembourg or so would be not treated the right way, because the financial center of Luxembourg is not just for Luxembourg, right? So it has a strong impact also beyond the borders of Luxembourg. And it's the same for Hong Kong, and it's the same for Singapore and so on, right? So, and many other places. So the city limit and the country borders are not good measures, means it's difficult to use city or national indicators. Even worse, if you use national indicators, look at the US. So let's say I'm a small financial center. I don't want to mention the name of a city. Let's say I'm a small financial center in the US. So if national indicators are used, I get the stock market value of New York. I get the asset management of Boston. I get the hedge funds of Greenwich, Connecticut. I get the futures and options trading from Chicago, and then so I get the fintech and startup ecosystem from the Bay Area. So, and then, you know, with all these indicators, I will certainly make it in the top 5, right, or top 10, right? So also cannot work. So then the question is what kind of indicators you can use, right? And then are these credible indicators? National indicators you can find from World Bank, IMF, OECD, and so on and so forth. So this is possible, but yeah, I think it's does not capture the financial centers in the right way. So of course you can use you can look at capital market figures. Look at the exchange in a certain city at a financial center. So for capital market, maybe it's a little bit easier, but banking, fintech, and so on, yeah, then it starts to be tricky.
Mhm.
And then also the nature of financial centers has changed. Let me give you 2 examples when we talk about financial centers. Which I used to mention for kind of new breed of financial centers. These are Hangzhou in China and Berlin in Germany, right? So why I mention these 2? Both of them, you know, are not famous for having lots of banks or headquarters or lots of banks, right? So neither Berlin, there are maybe a handful of banks in Berlin, which are headquartered in Berlin, in Germany. Same for Hangzhou, maybe even less. But why they have become so prominent financial centers? Because of fintech, or ultimately because large e-commerce players happen to start in Hangzhou and in Berlin. You know what I'm talking about. And then around this e-commerce ecosystem, there was a payment ecosystem needed. And then further services developed in the same ecosystem, lending, you know, putting money aside. In China, we have even seen, you know, these walled gardens providing all kinds of financial services for citizens, for retail investors. So these are totally new financial centers, and again, very difficult to measure. You cannot count the number of banks which are headquartered in that city or in that place. Will give you a totally wrong figure, right? So yeah, it's difficult to measure.
No, yeah, that's why I asked, because I thought it might be difficult when it comes to data gathering. And unfortunately, we are running out of time, but I think it's been a very interesting discussion to be able to hear from you, such an important person in the area of financial centers, to be able to talk a bit about what financial centers look like now, and then all these things that we discussed, TSC, data gathering, etc. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure that my viewers and listeners will learn a lot from you, and you're more than welcome to come again in the future if you want to elaborate further, because I know you're always publishing reports and growing, so I'm sure that in 1 year from now, for example, there will be many updates.
That would be wonderful, because ultimately, what we do is we think about the future of finance and the future of financial centers. We don't have the crystal ball for this, but we see a lot of trends which are guiding in a certain direction. You have mentioned central bank digital currencies, which in their wholesale version, not in their retail version, but in their wholesale version, will have the potential to dramatically change the way financial services, are offered. Then at the same time, we have artificial intelligence in finance. Also, I think with I think they will lead to transformational change in the financial industry too. So maybe, yeah, let's plan for another talk to discuss about this and how finance might look like in 10 years' time, right? We will be probably surprised.
That's a good topic. That's a good topic. I
Yeah.
mean, there's so many changes with AI, as you said, CBDCs.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thanks for having me, and I enjoyed the conversation. And yeah, good luck for your important work. And please stay a strong supporter of financial centers. We still need them. And yeah, let's see how this will develop further. This is what we are thinking about every day.
Thank you very much, Jochen, for your time, and thanks to all the listeners for listening to this episode. And please stay tuned for the next ones. Thank you very much, and see you all soon.